Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I've spent 21 years as an FAA-certified air traffic controller, worked my way up through regional centers, endured Chicago winters at O'Hare, the storms at Atlanta, even the red-eyes over the Pacific from LAX. But nothing prepared me for what happened at JFK that night. Name's Darren Cole. I'm 45, father of 2, and as of 6 days ago, I might be one of the last people alive with a clear view of how the sky came crashing down. We were running a midnight shift, me, Supervisor Renee Gallagher, and our radar guy, Justin Jazz Jimenez. The tower cab sits like a glass capsule on top of a 320-foot shaft, commanding a panoramic view over all 4 runways of John F. Kennedy International. Below us was the echo of New York City's heartbeat, but up here, it was always just radar, radio chatter, and blinking dots on scope. The shift started like any other graveyard run. Cargo flights out of Leipzig and Doha stacked into arrival paths. We had Emirates 203 on final, a 777 Heavy, and a FedEx MD-11 waiting for takeoff clearance on 4L. The wind was light out of the southwest. Visibility was good. Smooth ops. At 23:42 Eastern, I got the first odd call. Tower, this is Delta 781. We're seeing some disturbance in the cabin. Passenger and 14A's attacking crew. Repeat, we've got a serious medical emergency up here. I frowned. Delta 781, Roger. Do you require immediate landing clearance or medical services on the ground? There was a pause. Tower, we've restrained the individual, but others, more passengers are becoming aggressive. Something's wrong up here. Renee looked over from the admin console. Did he say more passengers? Before I could respond, 2 more squawks lit up on frequency. British Airways 227 from Heathrow and a JetBlue from Orlando. Both reporting disruptions. Same pattern, erratic behavior, aggression, biting. At first, I thought it had to be food poisoning, some kind of psychotic break, maybe contaminated cabin air. I patched in CDC protocols, flagged Port Authority Emergency Medical Services, and got Airport PD notified. By 0:10, we had 7 incoming aircraft declaring onboard emergencies. One pilot claimed his first officer locked himself in the lavatory and wouldn't come out. Another reported seeing blood on the cockpit door camera. Jesus Christ, Jazz muttered, spinning his radar console to track spacing. They're all squawking 7,700. Look at this, Darren. It's like half the East Coast is coming in hot. We saw Newark and LaGuardia's traffic starting to divert our way. Boston Center wasn't responding. Philadelphia was dark. Our own TRACON, Terminal Radar Approach Control, downstairs was now unreachable. I switched to ground frequencies, static. Something bigger was happening. Renee issued a lockdown protocol, something I'd only seen drilled in training. We secured the doors. Steel blast shutters rolled down over the stairwell access. That's when the cameras outside showed something I'll never forget. A parked Airbus, a 321, JetBlue, tail number N947JT. Its forward cabin door popped open. Passengers flooded out onto the jet bridge, not walking, running. Some sprinted into the terminal, others just jumped straight to the tarmac. Then the jet bridge collapsed under the weight, and what looked like a dozen bodies fell with it. One of them got up, and then leapt on another, tearing, clawing. I locked eyes with Renee. She whispered, "That's not a riot, that's something else." Down below, the terminal lights flickered. The Port Authority feed showed dozens of passengers crowding the TSA checkpoint, climbing over kiosks. A screaming woman in scrubs slammed her head against the glass barrier again and again until it shattered. Blood smeared across the monitor feed. I tried calling airport ops on secure channel, nothing. Our tower, by design, is self-contained in a crisis. Emergency rations, backup generators, independent HVAC filters. But we were only 4 people. Now joined by 2 others. Danny Park from maintenance, who got caught in the elevator just as the shutters closed, and Kayla Simmons, one of the nighttime weather observers from the METAR station. She'd run up 10 flights of stairs when she saw what was happening outside. She couldn't stop shaking. "I saw them tear through the Sky Club," she stammered. "People were screaming, but they didn't run. They just stood there, like they were stuck." That was when I started putting it together. This wasn't just some outbreak of mass hysteria or a chemical leak. It was spreading too fast, too exact. The control tower gave us full panoramic surveillance. Through binoculars, I saw fire breaking out at Gate 7. A 737 sat half-consumed in orange flames. The fire trucks from Airfield Ops Alpha never arrived. But that wasn't the worst part. It was the radios. Flight deck after flight deck, pilots began begging for clearance, crying, screaming, in some cases, just asking where to go. "Tower, this is Lufthansa 401. We've been in a holding pattern for 25 minutes. Cabin pressure is stable, but we've had 2 passengers expire. Then they got back up. My crew is, oh God, one of them just got the purser. We can't hold up here much longer. JFK Tower, this is American 88, requesting priority landing. We're losing control." Ooh, some calls cut out mid-sentence. Jazz rerouted a half-dozen inbound heavies to dump fuel over the bay, prepping for emergency landings, but we had no working ground crews. Most of the gates were compromised. Several tugs and fuel trucks burned near the concourse. A fuel tank erupted at Hangar 14 with a sound like thunder. And still, they kept coming. Planes were being ordered to land, with no support. At 1:02, Renee issued the most controversial command of her career. She denied landing clearance to all new inbound aircraft. She patched into NORAD, trying to find a federal authority. The Air Force confirmed outbreaks at McGuire and Langley. NORAD's voice was eerily calm, almost automated. "Ground assets are being redirected to urban perimeters. FAA guidance has shifted to limited response. JFK is off-grid. Hold your position and do not engage surface personnel." Translation: We were on our own. The worst moment came when one of our own, Oscar Toledo, another controller who'd gone off shift just 2 hours earlier, started pounding on the outer stairwell camera door. He was bleeding. Pale, eyes sunken, but still talking. Please, Renee, I need help. I got bit. Just on the arm. I'm not like the others." Danny, the maintenance guy, almost opened the shutter. But Renee stopped him cold. "Watch the timer." Sure enough, within 4 minutes, Oscar dropped to his knees, seizured. Then rose, head tilted, mouth open, moving like a puppet cut from its strings and yanked upright. He began clawing at the reinforced blast door with broken nails until the cameras failed. The only way left, in or out of the tower, is the elevator shaft. It runs from ground level through the secure access column, controlled via RFID tags and biometric access. We had overridden the system to lock it, isolating the cab between levels. That gave us the illusion of security, but nothing in the system was designed to stop someone, or something, from using the maintenance ladder that ran up beside the shaft. It was meant for engineers and techs, not intruders. Definitely not the walking infected. By the time we heard the third metallic clang, Renee had already pulled the building's internal schematics on the backup console. She highlighted the shaft diagram, cross-referencing where the noise might be coming from. Each rung of the maintenance ladder was bolted into a metal support frame with a service port access panel every 20 feet. The sound was moving steadily, one thud every few seconds, echoing off the steel walls like someone climbing with boots and hitting each rung a little too hard. Only none of us believed this was someone anymore. Jazz spun the console chair around and gripped the edge of the desk. "Look, the ladder isn't meant to be climbed that fast. Not with human legs, not in that posture." He wasn't shouting, but the edge in his voice said everything. "We're 8 stories up. No way that thing's moving like that unless it's already used to it." Nobody responded. Danny stood near the hatch door, holding a steel pry bar he'd pulled from the emergency maintenance kit. Not much use if whatever was in that shaft made it to the top, but it made him feel like he was ready. Kayla had gone completely silent, her arms wrapped around her chest as she stood near the outer glass, watching the airport below. The field was chaos. Fires burned on the western apron and around the fueling stations. One of the Dreamliners, a Qatar Airways 787, had somehow managed to taxi halfway onto the grass before its left engine gave out, igniting a fuel spill that now lit up the service corridor like daylight. More aircraft, at least 4 wide bodies, sat parked at odd angles near the terminal, all dark inside. No tug crews, no baggage carts, no movement except for the occasional shudder or twitch inside the jetways, barely visible through broken glass. The tower gave us a terrible gift, visibility. We could see every detail, every horror unfolding with clinical clarity. At 3:10, the approach radar lit up again. 2 more flights inbound, both reporting system failures, cabin disturbances, fuel warnings. One was a chartered Gulfstream IV, the other a long haul from Frankfurt. They'd been in the air for hours and had no fuel left to divert. We could deny them all we wanted, but gravity didn't take no for an answer. Renee tapped into the VHF channel and broadcast one of the hardest messages I've ever heard spoken over the air. JFK Tower advises unable to provide ground support. Recommend immediate diversion to ocean ditching or alternate unoccupied airfield. This facility is compromised. Repeat, this airport is compromised. We listened in silence as the Gulfstream pilot choked back emotion. Understood, JFK. God help you all. We'll try McGuire if we make it. The Frankfurt flight never responded. We later saw something arc low across the radar sweep, then vanish into static over the Long Island Sound. No squawk, no mayday, just gone. The sound in the shaft grew louder. Renee motioned for the rest of us to back away from the inner access hatch. There was no external camera pointing directly down the shaft, but Danny pulled the inspection borescope from the toolkit and threaded it through a seam in the casing near the emergency override panel. The feed came up blurry, grainy, black and white, but what we saw made my stomach twist. A shape, barely humanoid, clung to the rungs below the final access hatch. It wasn't climbing like a person. It moved in jerks, one limb flinging up, catching, dragging itself. Its torso was twisted unnaturally, as if its spine had snapped and kept moving anyway. One arm was raw down to the bone, the other clutching something metallic. Maybe part of the elevator cab wiring it had ripped free earlier. Its eyes, visible for a brief moment as the borescope adjusted focus, were wide and filmed over with a milky sheen. Its mouth hung open, jaw slack but twitching. It was almost at the top. That galvanized us. Renee grabbed the tower lockdown kit and keyed in the secondary override. A final security shutter began to slide into place over the access floor panel, but it moved slow, too slow. The hydraulic motors weren't built for speed, more for emergency fire sealing than immediate breach prevention. Danny stepped forward with the pry bar, positioning himself near the edge of the shaft. "You open it, I bash its damn head in," he muttered, though his hands were trembling. "No one's opening anything," Renee said firmly. "We're sealing it, and we're isolating electrical." Jazz shut down the elevator circuit manually. I cut power to the shaft's internal lighting. We plunged that narrow corridor into total blackness. Only silence followed. No more metallic clangs. No more scraping. But we knew it was still there. And now, it was waiting. We backed away from the hatch slowly, leaving the borescope cable coiled where it was. There was no telling what else might climb up that ladder, but we'd bought a little time, at least until fatigue or hunger made us stupid. The rest of the night passed like a slow-bleeding wound. We rationed energy, rotated watch shifts, monitored radio traffic. Renee spent 3 hours trying to patch into the FAA's emergency satellite uplink. We got bits and pieces. Hospitals overrun. National Guard units pulled back to secure Washington, D.C. airspace. Airports in Atlanta, Dallas, Denver, and L.A. reporting similar breakdowns. No central coordination. No FEMA response. The skies weren't ours anymore. At 5:17, the sun began to rise, casting a molten gold hue across the eastern runways and the broken fuselage of the JetBlue plane. The infected had moved during the night. We saw clusters of them now. Small groups scattered across the tarmac. Some walked in slow loops, others stood frozen near the edge of the airfield fencing. A few clawed at the grounded aircraft like they still thought there was life inside. But what caught my attention was something else. A convoy. 3 military Humvees rolled into the far end of the tarmac near the cargo terminal, kicking up dust and debris. 2 soldiers in full mop suits dismounted and began setting up a perimeter. They had rifles, but they also had something we hadn't seen in hours: coordination. Renee keyed the tower broadcast and tried to hail them on ground frequency, then fallback VHF, then UHF emergency band. No response. We watched them work, moving with cold, methodical precision. Then they disappeared behind a cargo hangar. 10 minutes later, a bright flash lit up the side of the building, followed by a shockwave that rattled the glass. Jazz ducked instinctively. "They're not here to rescue anyone." "They're burning the bodies," I said. "Clearing the zone." Kayla turned from the window. Her voice was hoarse from hours of silence. "If they're doing that here, then it means no one's coming to take us off this tower. They've already written us off." Renee didn't answer, but her silence said enough. The day dragged on. From the tower's vantage point, we tracked the pattern. The way the infected moved in bursts, then paused, always converging on loud sounds or fresh movement. They weren't mindless, not fully. They reacted like predators. There was no coordination, no speech, but definitely a shared awareness. Once, a bird startled near the fire-scarred edge of the terminal, and a dozen infected heads snapped in unison toward the noise. At 14:46, we lost power. The backup generators sputtered once, then went silent. The HVAC shut down. The lights dimmed. Screens flickered off. The radios died with a soft pop. We were no longer a control tower, just 6 people, sitting in a glass box surrounded by silence and sky, and somewhere below, something still waited in the shaft. The hum of electronics had disappeared completely. No more fan noise, no cooling systems, no monitor glow. We had become an island, 320 feet above a ruined airport, cut off from the world. Even the sky, once our domain, now felt like enemy territory. That feeling came not from fear, but from the sudden absence of human presence. No contrails, No navigation strobes, not a single aircraft in the sky. For the first time in my 2-decade career, American airspace was silent. We moved slowly in the darkness. Renee distributed headlamps and crank-powered radios from the emergency locker, but the solar units hadn't recharged due to smoke and cloud cover. Most of the stored batteries were already partially drained from overnight use. Jazz rigged a USB fan to an old backup battery unit, trying to keep airflow moving. Without HVAC, the air inside the glass cab was starting to go stale. It wasn't panic yet, but the sense of limited time had crept in, slow and relentless like the infected we watched below. Kayla kept one eye on the glass floor panel covering the elevator shaft. That panel, about 3 feet wide, was built from thick, laminated, impact-resistant polycarbonate. A design feature meant to impress visitors during VIP tours, a view straight down the tower core, the brochure said. Now, it just gave us a reminder that something was below us, likely still perched near the top rung of that maintenance ladder, waiting for vibration, movement, or sound. Danny wedged a metal shelving unit over the floor panel. It was a temporary measure, symbolic more than effective, but we all helped. Weight distribution mattered less than the message it sent. We weren't opening anything. The worst part was the heat. By noon, temperatures inside the tower reached 91 degrees Fahrenheit. The sun beat down through the angled glass panes, and even the partial sun shields weren't enough to stop the greenhouse effect. Water supplies were limited. We had 3 cases of bottled water and a few self-heating ration packs. Enough to last maybe 4 days if we stretched it and stayed mostly still. Jazz stayed glued to his crank radio, cycling through frequencies. Most of the bands were silent. Occasionally, we picked up snippets, recorded emergency messages playing on loop, AM station static, a distorted voice reading CDC infection protocols in Spanish. One voice, male and shaking, whispered something over an emergency weather frequency that none of us could quite make out. Jazz played it 3 times. It ended with the sound of gunshots and breathing. Then silence. That night, we drew lots for watch rotations. I got second shift, 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock, arguably the worst, because your body thinks it's sleeping time, but your mind knows it can't afford to be. I sat near the shaft hatch with a flashlight pointed away from the opening. I didn't want to give it, whatever it was, any light to focus on. Nothing moved below, but the silence had weight. You could feel it pressing up the shaft, like a column of heavy air. Every creak of the tower's metal frame felt magnified. Every time the wind gusted against the glass, I had to fight the instinct to duck. After months of routine traffic, holding stacks, approach vectors, handoffs, my world had become the echo chamber of my own breath. Just before 2 o'clock, the floor beneath me vibrated, barely perceptible. A single metallic tick, not loud, not urgent, but enough. I shined my light along the edge of the floor grate. A shape moved, just slightly, retreating downward. A hand, or what was left of one. Fleshy, raw, nails torn off. It had been resting there, motionless, inches from my boot. Watching. Listening. I didn't speak, didn't call for backup. I backed away slowly and left the light aimed across the surface. Nothing else moved. Not for the rest of shift. At daybreak, a distant rumble caught our attention. We crowded around the eastern windows and spotted it. A twin-rotor CH-47 Chinook thundering low over Jamaica Bay, escorted by 2 Apaches. They weren't flying toward the airport but rather skimming the southern edge, toward the Belt Parkway and into Brooklyn. Below them, a long convoy of vehicles crawled along the highway. Military transports, fuel tankers, what looked like decontamination trucks. They weren't coming to rescue us. They were bypassing JFK entirely. That told us everything. The airport was a no-go zone, either because of infection levels or strategic irrelevance we didn't know. What mattered was that command had already written us off. We debated using flares. Renee argued against it. If there were survivors, they weren't in a position to help us. If there were infected watching from the terminal, or worse, still inside the service tunnels, the last thing we wanted to do was draw attention. The Chinook didn't even look our way, just thundered on, trailing heat and noise and dust like a modern-day ghost. By the end of day 3, things had deteriorated. Kayla collapsed from heat exhaustion. Jazz developed a persistent cough from the dry air and stress. Danny began pacing, muttering about climbing down the shaft with a harness, just to check. We shut that down immediately. The fact that something hadn't broken through yet didn't mean it couldn't. At 18:15, I spotted a new movement on the tarmac. A man walking alone near Gate 12. He wore what looked like an airport worker's vest and carried a duffel bag. From a distance, he appeared uninfected, limping, deliberate, shielding his eyes from the smoke. When he reached one of the parked aircraft, a 737 MAX, he started trying the cabin doors. Then he looked up, straight at us. Renee grabbed binoculars and tracked him. "Either he's smart or lucky," she said quietly. "He's been hiding somewhere. Maintenance tunnels, maybe. That's the first live person we've seen in 48 hours. He pulled something from his vest, looked like a flare pistol, and fired it straight up. Red smoke bloomed against the late evening sky. Almost immediately, movement erupted from the jet bridge behind him. 2 infected burst out, sprinting at him full tilt. He turned to run, but a third came from the tarmac. It was fast, unnaturally so. Within seconds, they had him down. There was no hesitation, no pause. The moment they reached him, it was over. We stood frozen. Not one of us spoke. Even Jazz stopped breathing. But Renee, calm as ever, raised one arm and pointed at the infected that had moved fastest. "That one's not decomposed. Fresh. Recently turned." We realized then that the infection wasn't slowing down. The timeline from bite to transformation was getting shorter. Either the virus was mutating, or something else had accelerated. That night, the silence in the shaft ended. It began again as a low scrape, then a dragging sound. This time, we didn't wait. We deployed the emergency hatch seal, essentially a thick ballistic mat that locked over the shaft access plate. It wouldn't hold forever, but it bought us peace of mind. Or so we thought. At 2:38, Kayla, half asleep on watch, screamed. We rushed to the center. The floor panel wasn't just being scraped now. Something was pressing against it, a bulge. The plastic laminate had begun to bow inward, as if something with enormous strength was pushing from below. We heard a faint, ragged breathing sound, like wind whistling through a broken flute. Then, unmistakably, a voice. Not words. Just the rhythmic hiss and grunt of something mimicking breath. But there was intelligence in it. Pattern. Purpose. Danny stood paralyzed. It knows we're here. Renee didn't hesitate. She grabbed the flares. We're not going to survive this by hiding. For the first time, we seriously discussed evacuation. Through the maintenance catwalks along the outer shaft casing, there was a service ladder, external, almost never used. It ran the full height of the tower. Climbing it would be suicide in bad weather, but in calm conditions, it might be our only option. We geared up. We packed water, tools, radios, 1 flare per person. The plan was simple. Get to the exterior catwalk, descend as far as possible before dawn, and aim for the rooftop of the south terminal, where solar panels and emergency HVAC might still be operational. If we could re-establish radio contact there, or find another survivor, we might have a chance. We opened the outer panel at 3:50. The wind hit like a slap. The night was clear. The smoke had thinned. Below us, the airport was still on fire, but in the distance we saw headlights moving in Brooklyn. Civilian vehicles. Survivors. The catwalk was narrow, rusted, and not built for constant foot traffic, but it held. Renee went first, then Jazz, then Kayla, shaking but determined. Danny followed, gripping the side rail like his life depended on it. I waited, watching the bulging panel one last time. It wasn't cracking, but it would. I stepped out onto the ladder, locked the hatch behind me, and started down. We had left the control tower. The wind hit harder once I was outside the shaft's shadow. It was like walking into a wall of dry heat and rising ash. The upper third of the control tower swayed imperceptibly, but when you were clinging to a narrow steel rung with no safety cage, you felt every shudder in your teeth. The ladder was part of the tower's emergency maintenance infrastructure, a steel-framed rail bolted to the southern face of the shaft. Not meant for evacuation, not even in drills. Just inspections. No handrails, no fall arrest system, just you, gravity, and the climb. Below, the others were already 2/3 of the way to the first maintenance gantry, a steel platform jutting from the tower's midsection that housed a small auxiliary transformer station. It was our target for now, something solid to regroup on before attempting the much longer descent to the terminal rooftop. I forced myself to keep a rhythm, one rung at a time. Weight balanced close to the tower. My arms ached from tension more than exertion. My backpack pulled at my shoulders with every gust. The city stretched out around me, smoke-choked, half-lit, flickering where fires still burned in the boroughs. Out across Jamaica Bay, the reflection of distant flames danced on black water. Somewhere far off, a siren wailed, then cut off mid-howl. It took nearly 20 minutes to reach the gantry. Jazz was already there, setting up a hand-cranked emergency beacon to see if we could draw any airborne attention. Kayla was slumped against the mesh wall, breathing through her teeth. Her ankle had swollen during the descent. Probably twisted, maybe worse. Renee gave her a field wrap with duct tape and gauze, while Danny unscrewed the junction box to see if we could divert some remaining power. The gantry shook again, just slightly, but enough to stop conversation. We turned in unison, looking back up the ladder. No one spoke, but we were all thinking the same thing. If that panel gives, whatever's inside the tower might come straight down the shaft after us. We moved quickly. The ladder continued down to the tower's base, but the next section was partially covered in shielding panels, angled for wind protection but old, corroded and sharp as razors. Navigating it would take time. As we prepared to move, Renee spotted movement across the field. Terminal B, Gate 9. A row of shuttle buses, abandoned near the drop-off loop, had shifted. One of them rocked, just once. Then again, something was inside, or several somethings. Renee adjusted her binoculars. Infected, at least 10, maybe more. They weren't sprinting, not yet, but one by one, they emerged from the shadows, limping, staggering, sniffing the air like hunting dogs. One had the remains of a TSA uniform. Another wore part of a jet blue ground crew vest. They were different from the fresh ones we'd seen earlier, slower, but not unaware. Kayla groaned as she stood, teeth clenched. We had to move. By the time we reached the next catwalk, we were all soaked in sweat and covered in rust flakes. My forearms were raw. Jazz was breathing hard, the crank beacon strapped to his back now clanging softly with every step. At the 150-foot level, the gantry ended. Below that, we had to transition to a vertical pipe ladder anchored to the side of the support column. It was slick. Oil from some old maintenance job still coated parts of it. And there were stains, dark, dry, crusted over. Not rust, not oil, blood. We descended in silence. Every time my foot hit a rung, I felt the echo of it through the steel. The only way down was through noise. Halfway to the base, we heard it again. That sound from the shaft, but louder now, below us. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a voice. It was pressure. Metal groaning against metal. The sound of something moving through the internal elevator track. Climbing. Not slowly. Not groping around like the infected we'd seen at the terminal. This was faster. Intentional. The way a predator moves when it knows the prey is close. By the time we hit the base of the tower, Jazz looked back up and whispered, "It's coming." We ran. The access tunnel to the terminal was half collapsed. The concrete had split where a jet bridge had caved in from above. But there was still a crawl space. Renee led the way, flashlight clamped between her teeth. Danny followed, dragging Kayla behind him on a stolen luggage cart. I held the rear with Jazz covering our six. From inside the tunnel, you could hear the wind outside. And something else, footsteps? No. Too irregular. Scrapes. Like claws on drywall, it was behind us. We reached the service hall of Terminal C. It was a disaster zone. Emergency lights blinked red in half-buried ceiling panels. Luggage was strewn everywhere, some of it scorched from fires. A wheelchair lay upside down in a pool of water from a ruptured pipe. The airport's recorded evacuation message still played on a loop, warbled and glitching. Please proceed to your nearest exit. Emergency responders are your cooperation. We barricaded ourselves inside a janitorial closet while we checked Kayla's ankle again. Jazz checked the map painted on the wall, showing terminal layout and emergency exits. We had two options. Head east toward the runways and hope to reach the fire station, or try for the underground baggage conveyor tunnels and follow them to Terminal A's rooftop, where a helipad still might be intact. We went for the baggage tunnels. The air changed the moment we opened the service door. It was colder, staler. A low mechanical hum came from somewhere below, echoing through the walls. The tunnel was lit only by our headlamps. The conveyor belts were still. Piled bags everywhere, some open, some stained. About 200 feet in, we found the first body, a TSA agent, partially decomposed, tangled in a belt roller. His hand had been gnawed through at the wrist, not torn-chewed methodically, the same pattern we'd seen in the tower on that half-eaten co-pilot, the same virus, the same hunger. Kayla held it together longer than I thought she would, but when we passed a children's stroller tipped over near a luggage chute, blood splashed against the white plastic. She cracked, just for a second. A soft sound. Enough that we all paused. That's when the tunnel behind us echoed. A low, dragging shuffle. We all turned, headlamps swung like spotlights. The beam hit nothing. Then something shifted. At the far end of the tunnel, near the last bend, a figure. Bent, not crawling, but crouching low. Its skin was pale, wet-looking. Its limbs were long, longer than they should be. It didn't flinch in the light. It charged. We ran. Kayla screamed as Danny pulled her down the corridor. Jazz tripped. I grabbed him and hauled him up. We hit the far tunnel junction and slammed a mesh maintenance door behind us, locking it with a rusted valve. The thing on the other side didn't slam into it. It stopped, and then it smiled. We could see its face through the mesh. Blood-coated teeth. Black eyes. The same ragged Delta uniform we'd seen on the pilot corpse in the tower. Not a coincidence. It had climbed, it had followed us. And now it knew where we were. We didn't wait. We climbed the emergency stairwell at the far end of the service corridor. up 3 flights, then onto the rooftop of Terminal A. The air up there was cleaner, windier, but not empty. 3 other figures were there, survivors. A woman in a firefighter's jacket, a man in a Port Authority vest holding a bolt-action hunting rifle, and a teenage boy with a sat phone. They stared at us in disbelief. Then the woman pointed to the far side of the rooftop where a yellow H had been painted long ago but was now half faded. "We've got a heli inbound," she said. "Maybe 20 minutes. That's it. After that, it's gone." We turned. The thing from the tunnel was at the rooftop access door. It was watching. It wasn't breaking through. It didn't need to, because it had already followed us this far. And it was waiting for us to go back down. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.